right, just keep going. And we're going into compost use because compost use is so important. Our carbon footprint is so much better when we actually put it in the ground, put it to use. If we just let it sit in windrows, we're not doing what we need to. We need to keep that circular economy working. And we want to keep those nutrients going. So this is, and I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. I have posters of all the compost use options, and they're 24s by 36s. You guys will have those posters or access to those posters. You're welcome to print them out so people know what to do. And it gives, very basic instructions on we want 2 inches of this, we want, 10 tons per acre, that kind of stuff. Very general. So that people are using it. But this is actually mortality composting, roadkill composting that we're putting back on the roadside. So the deer were there to start with. We composted. This facility had 700 in 1 year that they were composting of roadkill. It's downstate New York in New Paltz area, New Paltz, Newburgh. And so they actually, and this was really late in the season. They did it in late November. They put this down and they just dumped 3 inches of compost over this whole roadside. And I was like, that's too much. We really don't need that much compost there, but they did it. And then they took a track machine and they rolled over it. And they hydroseeded it. And this is November in New York, very cold. I was afraid we'd have frozen seed, and if grass seed freezes, it dies. After it sprouts, we're fine. After it has a root base, it's fine. Then it likes the cold, but otherwise it doesn't want it. So they hydroseeded, they rolled it over with a track machine, and then they hydroseeded it, and that was March. So that's March 2007. And already they had that much grass in there. So this is from late November till March. And had great take, and they will not have to add more organic matter to those roadsides. And you don't necessarily want to be doing that on your roadsides. It would help your roadsides, but it's too much of a hassle to do that. So that is that one. This is, I was telling you a little bit about Texas. And Texas had such bad aquifer problems, you can see all the bare soil. They didn't just do that, that's how it is. So they put biosolids compost down, and they sprayed it all the way on these slopes. And this is what they ended up with. They made sure that they planted proper grasses, the proper grasses for that climate, or the proper ground covers, whatever it might be. There are low mowing grasses and no mowing grasses, and there's all kinds of different things that actually can go in there. But because they had the water, because of the compost, we actually established all these, or they actually established all of these slopes. This is roadside. This is what it looks like. That's what it looked like afterwards with the compost applications. And one of the reasons we all know we don't have enough compost. We never can make enough compost. And that's why they use the biosolids compost, because humans are the biggest CAFO in the world. We are the confined animal feeding operation, and all of our shit has to be dealt with just like everybody else's. Every other species. So being able to use this, and this is a one-time application, so we're not concentrating metals and stuff like that over time. We were able to get away with something like this. I don't worry about the pathogens in human manure. For the most part, that's the least of my worries. It's more the heavy metals that will concentrate if I keep applying that biosolids compost. That will be a problem. This is a wetland that we were restoring, and I actually never got to go to this. I advise them on how to do it, what to do, and what mediums, what soil mixes we needed. And DOT accessed this, and it was an old landfill, and ended up that it was in the middle of the highway on a meridian, so nobody really could get in there, but they wanted to restore it so the garbage wasn't going into the water, the water streams. So they took all that out, they exhumed that, and then they built this beautiful wetland. And that's what that looked like. They were going to put in a poultry manure that wasn't composted well. And I said, send it off, tell me how mature it is, and see. So we ended up having to get other medium because that poultry manure was just too hot. It didn't have it wasn't mixed with other things. And they were doing their soil blends, but it still would have killed the plants. And we're trying to represent a bog here, a peat bog. So the compost actually can be sort of a peat replacement. And that's how that kind of works, so that we don't have to keep mining peat. We can actually recycle and recirculate all of this stuff. We have compost socks. So we have blowing machines, blowing trucks, different things. You'll see some pictures of them. Where we fill socks up and we use those as berms. We were talking a little bit about, I said something about if you have water that's going to run off your site someplace, we want to put a little hill of compost down there. We also can use these socks. So somebody invited me to a knitting factory once, and I'm like, why do you want me to come here? I mean, I do crochet and stuff, but I was like, why am I going here? Well, they had converted this sock factory into this sock factory. So they were making these 12 to 24-inch socks. We filled those up, and you're going to see a load of pictures of that as we go through these slides. We fill them with all different types of carbon depending on our goal. On roadsides where I'm just trying to filter the water before it goes into a waterway, down a ditch, I will use like a coarse wood chip, because that acts as that filter and it doesn't clog up really fast. So that netting, the netting is polyester. It doesn't go away. I don't know that it's polyester, but it's plastic. It doesn't go away, but it does contain and stabilize things for a long period of time. I'll show you some more of those socks. We put it in our row middles. So we put it in our wine grape production, and it goes in the row middles. And we'll even use an immature compost here, because what happens if I use an immature compost right in here, it'll keep the weeds down, because the volatile organic compounds, acids, will just keep those weeds down, and I don't have to worry about that competition. And then after things continue to break down in there, then it can come out to the vines and be helpful for the vines. Yes?
Megan, is your wait a minute, it sounded like you said immature compost.
What's that?
The term you used, it sounded like you said
Immature. Immature compost, yeah. So compost that is not stable. Because if it's not stable, when it's not stable, it has more volatile organic compounds. And these compounds actually can kill some plants. Like if you have seedlings and things like that, it'll cause damping off, which I think most of us probably have an idea what damping off is. It's the bottom of the base of the stem sort of just pinches and dies. The plant just dies off. And that's because of those volatile organic compounds. There are other reasons it happens also, but that's a reason that it could happen. So we don't use a lot of immature compost in these applications. We may use it on hay fields because they can take it, but there are only some times there's only some reasons why we would do that. So big grape industry. So we're back to the socks. Sorry, that one jumped in there. I'm standing there, I'm blowing a blanket right now, and this is on a slope that there's a stream down below here, a bridge, and a storm washed everything out. So we're putting stuff back. The DOT put some riprap in there, and then we put some socks in there, and yeah, so the socks are in here, and then we blew the blanket on. And the blanket, remember I was describing yesterday, the blanket, when it hits a blanket of, when the water hits a blanket of compost, drip, 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 it just sucks it in. If it were hitting soil, it would make mud, and the mud would just run away. But the compost can't do that. The compost stays right where it is. Even if I have a whole windrow of compost in a floodplain, and it floods and it's underwater, it will keep its shape. It won't go anywhere. And then we've had I've seen it happen in massive floods before where we lost people and bridges and all kinds of stuff, and the compost will just stay there and will be in its shape of a windrow. You lose a little tiny bit, but it's amazing, and it just releases that water slowly as all the water goes off of the land. Always important to deal with our drains, so put socks around our drains or something to keep the particulate matter out, or else our roads and bridges people have to go in and dig it all out, and that's a pain. This is just in new housing construction in a neighborhood. They've got to protect everything, so they have these big socks in there, and you can see right below that it doesn't have, that you're not taking all of that compost out of there and running it into whatever water it might get into. So that protects. Another one. This was a big erosion control project. It was a four corners, a weird shaped four corners, and this is 16 feet off of the road, so where that river is 16 feet down. And our DOTs had come in and they wanted to get all the trees out of there. So they destabilized the whole area, and it was late in the season again. Shaking my head, And so we put blankets and socks in here. Let me just hold on. Yep. We put blankets and socks in here. The socks are up, you can't even see them at this point, but the socks are up in there, and we have some up against the rails, and on the other side we had to do the same thing. But we put those blankets and socks in, and we were able to get beautiful red clover growing and grasses and stuff like that, so the roots will hold that soil and we won't have such horrible erosion in there. That's a class 1 fishing stream, and we don't want any of our streams to end up housing our soil. We want our soil where we can use it. This was a roadside ditch, and it was undercutting this bank. There's a telephone pole right on the other side of there, and then it goes down into, this gray part is a culvert. So we pin, you can see these stakes. They're wooden stakes that we use. We don't use metal stakes just because people would get hurt with metal stakes. The wooden stakes eventually will break down, but that kept all of this from growing over. And that's what it looks like afterwards, 4 months later. We can seed into those socks. We will pin the socks in, because sometimes the water, on water courses is pretty harsh. So we can pin them right in, and then all that water is just going across the road, and it's not it doesn't keep taking that person's land and destabilizing the telephone pole that was above it. This is some ditches, and they're on a very steep hill called Turkey Hill in Ithaca, and this is how they clean these things out. So when they clean them out, there's no vegetation in there. Everything just runs down into, in our case, Cayuga Lake and our gorges and all that kind of stuff. So we put these socks in, we pinned the socks, we also cut those got cut down, the post got cut down so it wouldn't cause problems. And this is what it looked like afterwards. There was the ditch was going into a Class 1 stream, so that we used that big sock filled with wood chips so that it wouldn't be able to go into that, all the soil wouldn't go into that stream. Oh, hold on. Yeah, okay. So I think that's, where am I? Boy, we might have gotten the wrong, well, we found that. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to transition into mortality if we're ready for that. So is everybody ready to do that, or do you want to do your slide? I don't know where your slide is, because that's a little bit about siting. Yeah, yeah, let's do that, and then we'll do the mortality last, so that we've got all that. But I just wanted to, and so that's as big as it's going to get. So people could come up if they want. It'll stretch your legs, and then we can talk about this. Keith, you're going to have to guide us through it. But what we're doing here is Keith's farm is going to be a compost operation, and we're trying to figure out where exactly, or Nog Hill Farm, I'm sorry. We're trying to figure out where exactly. So you want to come? You don't have a pointer, so you're going to have to.
Okay. Oh.
So come on around.
All right.
And we can talk about it. So anyway, looking at an aerial photo, we were supposed to have the aerial photos so that you guys could actually look at these, and each group could design these, but they didn't end up printing them out for us. Your thing doesn't have a pointer.
Okay. Okay. All right. So let's see here.
This can be your pointer.
Okay. Thank you for that. We come in at the very top up there is Highway 690. So this is about a half a mile or less gravel road back to our property. And so here is our property starts at this corner, and the outside boundaries are there, and over to here, and then come up through here. But here is where we had originally talked about setting it,
Yes,
which would have been here.
Yeah, we talked about that the other day when we went out. It's fairly steep, and there are some weird lines that would allow water to go overland. So that's a worry. We're looking to protect water when we're siting these things.
So we would come into the property here, and then our original site, we would go straight back there, and there's a paddock right about here. And what Gene was talking about, we went straight up a hillside right there, and we kind of stood right there. But because of the neighbors, there's no trees down through here, Gene was mentioning. Oh, great. Oh, man. You try to get me to chase like a cat or something.
No trees over here, and a fairly hostile neighbor on this side. We always have to deal with our
Right there.
neighbors. We can't just put something in and expect them not to take us out if they don't like what we're doing. And this can absolutely happen. Ms. Green was saying something about we have to put public notices in so that people know what we're doing. And a lot of people are afraid of composting, are afraid of waste management sites, all that kind of stuff.
And for just reasons, right?
Sometimes for just reasons. I mean, we have some facilities that are just too big, and too big to fail does not equate in my brain.
Yeah.
When you're too big, sometimes you have odor issues, and you affect and, piss off your neighbors.
Yeah. So for the reasons Gene had just mentioned, a number of those, we opted to come back down this hill. Right in here is a paddock. So now as you come in, then Here we have a stand of trees, oak trees that we planted. But just right along here is where we're looking at an alternative place to do the
Hold it steady, don't circle it. I'm sorry, please hold it steady. Going in circles is giving my eyes issues.
But I'm gonna ask Keith a question right now. What is your goal in making compost right now?
I think I kind of showed my hand when I showed the video. My first goal is to improve the soil organic matter. And I love Dr. Lucas' presentation because he really unpacked a lot for me. And in having showed that video, my pastures, because one of the biggest things, we have 3 sheep there now. We used to have a sheep herd about 30. Because of our pastures was so horrible, we shut them down. And we've been building our pasture up for the last 3 or so years. And we just at a good spot. For us, this pasture here, it's good. It's from where it was. And the one that you've seen on the video back here, it was just horrible. These white spots are where I have hay we had fed our horses in the winter. But here is where we're looking at building our compost now so that we can put more compost back into our property.
Right.
And then once we get that formulaic process down pat, then we can look at our permitting process. And with green coming up, I realized that we can just start that developing process for years.
Yes.
For years. And I'm like, oh my God.
Because it's your own material, it's on your own farm, it's on your own land. I'm sorry. It's on your own farm, on your own land, so you have that leeway, especially Keith's they're out in the middle of nowhere. You have sheep on the land. You had sheep on the land. That's one thing that does wipe out your grasses. So that really hurts your grasses because the way sheep graze is they'll actually
rotate.
They kill the roots and everything. They take almost everything. Other animals don't graze that harshly, but sheep will take everything.
If you don't have a good regimen in place.
And that does, if you're not rotating and adding the manure and doing all that kind of stuff, so they can really take things out. Horses won't so much, but sheep really can do a number on it.
That's why we have a small herd now.
Yeah, that's why you have 3 right now. So, but the one thing that can happen is he was looking at putting the windrows up in that field, up here, which is a little bit steep and water is a little bit odd. But if he needs that manure, if he needs that compost on all different fields, what he can do is just make windrows in each of the fields.
Wow.
And let it sit, and they'll be right on the side of that field where they need to be spread. So it's less handling. So I have to get the material in, I have to get the feedstocks in, and then I can run windrows all the way around the edge of that field, let it compost, and then I can apply it right to that field. And so that's how we do the farm nutrient management. If it's for their own nutrients, if it's for their own soil building, that's what we want to do. Then once he's buried in compost, then he can come out and say, boy, I have a great product now, and then he can come out and sell. So that at that point, they will be able to sell their material after they make enough. But right now, they can stay under the regulation and not have to deal with all of that stuff. So it depends on how much land you have and where you are.
If you put windrows around a field like that, what prevents them from just becoming huge piles of weeds?
You want to make sure that you maintain them, so that you do some turning or something like that. You don't want to. One of the things with site management is you always want to mow your site. Don't let the weeds come up, and mow before plants come to seed. before they even develop the seed, because then you don't ever have the seed, and then that's a green manure that helps the soil right on top of it. Keith told me another thing that, about their development, that he had all this hay that he had baled for the compost operation. And I was like, what? And that's okay. But hay is not the best thing to compost. When we have rotten bales, that's all the better. That's fine. Then we can go ahead and break those bales up and let that compost process occur at that point. But when things are baled, they don't really break down that evenly, unless I add a nitrogen source. And we're doing something with human urine right now. We're doing human urine trials, taking urea and infusing it into big round hay bales and allowing that. We start that like 6 months before. We started in the fall. We start infusing bales in the fall. And then by spring, we're planting into them. And a lot of that carbon and nitrogen has started to compost and started to make soil medium to be useful for our plant growth. And then we put tomatoes and everything in, beets, tomatoes, carrots, all kinds of things in these hay bales. And we had a lot of produce. There's a lot of produce. So it's interesting. We're looking at it. We do have a pasteurizer now for the urine, just to make sure if somebody was sick that we're not having problems with that. We don't have a good way of figuring out what the levels of heavy metals would be in the urine. That's my only concern, because when we take drugs, when we take pharmaceuticals for our health and all that kind of stuff, we are peeing and pooping out those things afterwards. So we have to make sure that we're not getting an affected compost. So we're still working on the human urine, but it's a great source of nitrogen. Yep.
I just have another question on this scenario. What's the purpose in going for the public permit this early in the process?
There isn't
putting out a
any.
public notice. I think I would get my process down.
He doesn't have to do any of that.
And,
Exactly. Right. So,
I mean, for me, I think Gene let me know what your thoughts. The only reason I might perhaps even consider any part of that process is a public notice, or to go out and meet.
I don't think you need to. You do want to get feedstocks from your neighbors, however.
So one of the things that Green was talking about is that you just want to start talking to your local regulators.
Uh-huh.
You want to let your neighbors know what you're trying to do.
Sure.
So would I want to do that though now?
I think that's a good idea. I don't know exactly how you approach the hostile neighbor, or she's not
I probably wouldn't
hostile.
say much to her at all.
Right, exactly. But she has signs on the thing. We shoot first. We don't call 911. So it's like, I'm like, okay, I don't think we want to turn around here.
Yeah.
In putting up a sign or a notice, if he was to use best management practices, NRCS conservation practices,
Yep.
or some type of keywords like that, it would let the public know that he's not going out there willy-nilly and just trying to do something. He's going by standardized or approved or documented practices that might get them thinking about, hey, I'm gonna go talk to him, because if it works, I'm gonna do the same thing. So he could be a platform for his community to spread sustainability.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably where I would start, just the local NRCS and soil management office, just to say hi. I went to a composting conference, and this lady convinced me that we could do it, and so we're going to start that process. I think that's probably the as far as I would want to go for at this point.
I agree. And I wouldn't even be that, but I would play first.
Yeah.
Play, get your recipe down, get a couple of feedstocks in there, start stacking, start putting it in windrows, and then you can start manipulating it with your turner, you have a bucket, right? So you can start manipulating it with that. I also said to somebody else, and I don't know that I said this publicly, But one of the things you can do to lighten up your compost is to actually put, if you have forks on your device, on your bucket, or you are able to use forks at all, you just take the fork,
Yeah.
put it in, move it down the
Oh,
windrow.
you're going down the
So
side
you're not
of the
actually
windrow.
even turning. Yeah, you're going down the side of the windrow. You're not actually even turning it, flipping it all together. All you're trying to do is get air in there. So being able to do that for farmers in particular, because anybody who handles a hay bale has a spire, has one of those things. And, that kind of thing allows us to do this. And we do it in mass scale as well, because we don't want to liberate a lot of odor. We don't want to liberate a lot of, we don't want to lose our nitrogen. So we want to keep that in the pile. So when we're doing the mortality stuff, we will just, if we do anything, we'll just shove forks in the bottom, allow those preferential air channels to occur, and we have aeration.
So Gene, again, would experience kind of help determine when to aerate, or would we use like a thermometer or just a visual? Or
Yep. So if you want to have a turned compost, you want to stack your compost and make it into the windrow. And you might have to use your bucket to form the windrow a little bit, just to make it nice. And I don't like short piles. I like them to be 5 or 6 feet tall, if possible. Because we have winter here. We want our process to go year round. And if we really are working against it, physics tells us we only need 3 by 3 by 3 foot cube for heat. But that has to be perfect. And we can't have 19-degree weather outside, for that to actually happen. So we want to give it a little bit more insulation. So I like 5 by 5 by 5 at a minimum versus, versus a 4-foot pile that I have to double stack in the winter because it's going to shut down. So
what would be
when that
next?
temperature goes up, so the temperature will go up in those piles, and you'll monitoring those temperatures. And then when you've monitored, then you're going to, if our temperatures go down, that's when we want to add some aeration. So when temperature goes down, we'll aerate, we'll turn or do something.
So temperatures can go up and down using
will.
air
Constantly.
and or water. I was thinking water would do with the temperature, but you're saying air is a tool for that.
The
So
microbes need the air, and if they aren't, and I don't think I explained this properly, but the microbes are what actually give us the heat in the compost. They're metabolizing. It's like having 50 fifth graders in a room. I don't have to heat it. They're giving off all kinds of heat. Your neighbor right next to you is giving off heat. We don't have to do that. That's what those microbes, those billions of microbes are doing. They're working. And then when we keep them happy, when we build that proper habitat, we don't have to do the work. So that's why I encourage us to get air into the pile, facilitate the airflow into that pile so that I don't have to do it with my back.
Okay, so in this property layout, so we'll start trying to do a 100-foot row closer to the tree line there, so that I can bring my tractor in to aerate. And then I was thinking about facilities. You said don't handle it at this point. So if I don't use this, how would I store that, and so on and so forth?
Oh, you're not going to store. You're never going to store
Never
it.
store.
You're
Okay,
going to
going-
spread.
Okay.
As soon as it's done, you're spreading.
All right.
No, I wouldn't be doing any storage unless you wanted to sell it ultimately, but you really want to use your first bunches of products. And your first bunches of products might not be perfect because they may not get proper aeration all the time. They may not work as quickly as if we had a forced air system under it. But a forced air system also can dry our system out and slow it down that way. And most of the time we are forcing too air, as I was alluding to yesterday, we're forcing too much air into our forced air systems.
Yeah, I think we will really want to get down this windrow, and we did talk about a static. I think I said this right. Help me out. I think some of the bigger operations got one big old static pile, and all they do. I hope I'm using the right terminology. They just come in and just the bucket and just let it float and fluff it up and get the air in it, and that's it. And they
We
have
don't
any
ever
force.
want our piles to be over about 12 feet,
Okay.
12, 13 feet. Don't ever make piles that are over that height. It doesn't matter what medium you're using, it will cause fires. So right now, I was just dealing with some emails from Hurricane Maria. St. Thomas has a landfill. They chipped all of the hurricane debris, and they just put it up on the landfill in huge mountains. And guess what? It caught on fire.
Fire.
So we have perfect storms down there because we have a hot climate, and we can have spontaneous combustion in these things, so the landfill is still on fire. And they're trying to blame it on other things, but I told them 10 years ago, before Hurricane Maria ever hit, that they needed to make windrows. And if they had windrows there, they wouldn't have had a problem. But because they made a big amorphous mountain, it just caught on fire, and then all of that fuel is right there, and it's caused a lot of problems. And it's really hard to put out compost fires. I was saying it's really hard to wet piles yesterday. It's also really hard to put those fires out, especially when it's on top of a mountainous, huge landfill. And that landfill it has a wonderful view, but a little bit too much. So, okay, can we switch back to mortality? Are there any other questions while he's switching? Are there any other questions on this? Yeah. Go ahead.
No.
Wait, I'll ask after this.
Okay. Oh, no, you can ask.
Is there companion planting that would be beneficial around the border of what you're composting?
It would be better if it were just in, maybe even a monocrop, which I don't advocate monocrops, but if you just are mowing it, it's probably just as well. I don't think I would worry about doing companion plantings there. As ground cover on the slopes and stuff that we saw, companion planting would be great. Because there you're really trying to facilitate the growth and root systems and all that kind of stuff. So that's where I think I would do any kinds of companion planting that I wanted to. I also suggested that Nob Hill go ahead and do some terracing if they want to grow some of their vegetables, do some terracing on that steeper slope where there is a pasture. But it probably can go either way. But they may have some really nice terraced farming in there. When they have their beds established and all that stuff. Right now, you guys have a bed of carrots. You're doing winter carrots, Kath? Yeah. So it really looks beautiful, and it's not up on the hill, but it potentially could be. So, okay, so mortality. I do a lot of mortality work. And it's very, very simple stuff. Let me see if I can figure out how to do this one. I'll use this one. Okay. Carcass disposal options. And these are changing. These constantly change. So getting rid of the cow that just died or that sheep that just died, we can bury it. We can render it, potentially. How's your rendering industry down here? Does everybody know what rendering is? That's taking waste meat, waste animals, and making them into a product like lipstick and some of the pharmaceuticals, feed. The fats are used, gelatin is used for all of our gelatin purposes. So that's what rendering is. It takes the whole animal. It can use the fats and oils and greases that come off of that animal, and it can be rendered. And we have had an extremely strong rendering industry in the United States for a few hundred years, probably 120 years, something like that, where we did make products out of it. But then we got too cocky, and we started feeding cows to cows, cow meat to cows, and chicken meat to cows and cow meat to chickens, and it was, we really went a little too far on that because they don't eat meat. Their stomachs aren't designed to do that. But they said, well, this is protein, so we can just give them this protein. But all protein is not equal, and they couldn't handle that. And it was causing problems with prion diseases like mad cow and things like that if they're actually eating meat, eating all parts of cows. So our rendering industry is much weakened. They used to pay people for their animals so that they could render them and make these products. And now everybody has to pay, a couple $100s just to get rid of a carcass. So, and it can be anywhere from $100 to $700, $800 for a horse just to get rid of them. You're paying somebody, which makes a bit of sense because they just have to dispose of it. They don't have any product value out of that. Alkaline digestion is another one, but there are only 2 or 3 big ones in the country. We do have one at Cornell because our incinerator, we talk about cremation and incineration and all that kind of stuff. We need to be doing less and less and less of that because of air pollution. And when we start burning an animal or a person or something like that, we are a lot of water. It takes a lot of energy to do that, and the emissions are tremendous from that. And our DOT, when we lost some rendering, we had some problems a couple of years ago, and we lost I lost our large rendering because of a pentobarbital contamination. And the whole United States was involved in that because I should back up. I'll back up in a minute on that one. Let me I'll deal with that one. I think we have the right. Okay, hold on. Anyway, alkaline digestion is chemical digestion that takes the animal, dissolves the animal basically into a little bit of what we call ash. You might see the structure of a bone, you touch it, and it's like ash. So that's what we have left with that, but we only have a couple of those in the country. Cornell has one, Iowa has one, Colorado has one, big ones, and then there are some small ones around, and there are some mobile ones that they have that aren't quite working yet, but they're working on that, and it would be a good thing if it could work. But the effluent, you have to get rid of all the effluent from that, and that's a pH of 13, so very basic, and so it becomes problematic. We actually do send all of ours down to the sewage treatment plant, and we can do that. But it's very expensive and it's touchy. We were not allowed to replace our incinerator at Cornell because of neighbor issues and things like that, and so that's why it took us 10 years to site this alkaline digester right on campus. So, burial, we've just banned CAFOs, and I think this was going to go for everybody, but CAFOs are not allowed to bury their dead stock anymore. It has to be dealt with in another manner. So in New York, that's been implemented, and it's coming through NRCS. That's why I'm pretty sure it will be countrywide. Our CAFO rules, our confined animal feeding operation rules, are guided by the federal government, and then each state implements them differently, but they can make them stricter. And NRCS and Soil and Water have kind of said, no, we can't keep doing this. If I have a herd of 100 cows, of 1,000 cows, and I have a mortality rate of 4%, I have to deal with 40 dead cows a year. Okay? So that's just average. That's a 4% mortality rate on dairy cows. It's it's one of those things, it goes from 4 to 7, and the 7 is really for calves. And a lot of times we take calves out anyway, we slaughter calves or whatever. But it, you know, that's the average, and we don't talk about it a lot because it does sound like a lot of flesh waste. So I don't want to each year be burying 40 cows on my land, even if I have 300 acres. I will bring that. I'll just tell you a quick story about a situation in New Jersey. And one of the reasons that we do compost these guys versus bury them. So I was working with the veterinarians and DOTs there, and 100 plus years ago, they had a bubonic plague outbreak. So it's a spore-forming organism, kills people. And it hit 100, 200 pigs. So they buried the pigs, nose to tail, nose to tail, nose to tail, all over this farm, okay? And then New Jersey is very, very urban. And 100 years later, somebody came in and built their McMansion. And when they drilled their well, they brought up bubonic plague spores. Spore-forming organisms can persist in the soils forever. So anthrax, botulina, all of those things, bubonic plague, they stay in the soil in a spore. And as soon as they get the right conditions, then they can be active again and infect. So we do have anthrax problems with cows. And that's just sort of, it's in the soil. So sometimes we can have problems with that. Incineration, I already talked about that. Landfilling, they said they put a lot of horses in landfills down here. And we do that. New Jersey will take anything, so they take a lot of the New York horses. They will. It's like, and Watertown will take any effluent that you want to give them for their sewage treatment plant. So it all gets shipped. For our effluent from our digester was being shipped 130 miles, and I'm up towards Watertown, about 130 miles to go into their sewage treatment plant because they'll take anything. So then Tompkins County decided that they could take it, and so it just goes down the hill and into our sewage treatment plant now. So why compost? Kills pathogens. That's the most important thing. My research assistant and I were brought down to Brazil, and we were flown all over Brazil with the veterinarians to teach them. They don't have killing frosts and all that kind of stuff. So they've got more pathogens that they want than they can deal with. So we taught Brazil how to, their Embrapa, their USDA Embrapa, how to compost their animals. So they do that also in Brazil to an extent. It can be done pretty easily. It's really a fast operation. If you have wood chips and you have a dead animal, it's very fast and easy, and you have a loader, I should say. Fast and easy. I have done it with Amish. We have pulled the animal onto a ramp and then onto the bed. So we have done that without equipment, without motorized equipment as well. All animals can be composted. Where's my bag? I can't walk. My bag has a bunch of fact sheets in it, mortality fact sheets. It's right over there, Kathy. Yeah, you can grab them out of there. I shouldn't have any socks or underwear sticking out of there today, but you know, I had to pack the thermometer, and I packed my clothes around it because it was being checked. And then he's laughing at me because my socks fell out of the bag. Where are you?
I've been taught not to be digging in on
Not to be digging into a woman's purse. She may get stabbed with something. Don't worry. So, and feel free to take these, get them to people that do need them, but I'm not taking them back with me, so somebody will have them. Where was I? Oh, it can be done pretty much anywhere. What I was going to say was on that fact sheet, if you go to the back page, we composted a 40,000-pound northern right whale. okay? And we enveloped it in horse manure, because horse manure is that 30-to-1. And that animal was, and this is something that would be very popular down here, the animal was re-articulated into a museum piece. So one of the things we do that people have gotten fond of doing is the New York City police horses. They've got horses down there that live in the city and all that kind of stuff. When they're ready to die, we compost them, and then we re-articulate those skeletons. And we do it for the vet school, we do it for others. I don't do it, but people are interested in that puzzle and that anatomy lesson that they need to put all it together. And so we have people that actually do some of that work to preserve the skeleton. So the northern right whale is actually hanging in a building that was built for it specifically, because we don't have a lot of northern right whales left. And this animal was caught in fishing equipment and died a very slow, painful death from infection. And they weren't able to get the equipment off of it, but they put a radio tracker on it so that they knew where it died, because when you hit 40,000 pounds of flesh with a boat, you're in trouble. You know, any ship. So it was brought to shore, and we actually brought it back up the highway to Ithaca, and it was composted behind our hospital, right at the Paleontological Research Institute, who had bid on the whale and said, we'll do it. So any size animal can be done. I don't have any limits. Low labor, placental tissues, placental membranes, all that kind of stuff can be done. Doesn't cost a lot of money. It's wood chips, and sometimes we do have to pay for wood chips. In a 1.2 million avian influenza bird outbreak, so I had 1.2 million birds. I had a billion eggs, manure, and feed. I needed to bring in 180 tractor-trailer loads of carbon, of wood chips. And I just said, keep bringing them, because we needed that much to make all those envelopes. But that's the kind of volume that we work in with these disease outbreaks. And that was a smaller one. The 1.2 million was a smaller one. We did a 3.2, and that was the 100 acres of windrows. Neighbor relations, we don't want, if we throw our animals out back, our dead stock out back, we don't want the neighbor's dog, and that's who it'll be. It's more than the coyotes, is the neighbor's dog is going and digging in the bone pile. And people can get sick. So feedstocks, the animal, the carbon, the butcher waste, we manage it. We don't want to put it in a big amorphous pile. We want to put it in that windrow, nice, neat windrows. Always with anything that we want to facilitate, anything that we want to compost. The windrow facilitates the compost process. It's a little tent. And heat heats up in the middle, heat rises, and everything needs to go around that windrow, and that's how really things work. We do beds, like you saw the one situation where I have the air sucking through the system. That we actually do make a bed, but it's very rare that we'll make a 5-foot bank of manure to do that with, because it's really hard to pull air through and push air through those. This is a bed, what I consider a bed. Right over there. So when I'm dealing with this is a butcher waste operation. These are windrows of butcher waste. When I'm dealing with butcher waste, pretty sloppy, right? Don't want to put it on the ground ever. So before I leave this pile, this built pile, I'm going to put a bed down there so that when I come out with my bucket, and I have a place to put it. I don't want to put it on the ground. I don't want to put it anyplace else. It might be in barrels. But even if I have it in barrels and I bring the barrels out on my bucket, I want to tip them right off of that so that I don't have to do all the work. We can work smarter so that we don't kill ourselves when we're doing some of these things.
So you put down some before, you don't want to put your.
That's the
bucket on.
bed.
You don't want to put your bucket on because you don't want to disturb the soil?
I don't want to put it on the soil because if I put blood on the soil, I'm in trouble. Then all the animals are going to be coming from all over the place, and I'll tell you some stories about that. We actually, in one of the avian influenza outbreaks in Pennsylvania, we were on a duck farm. And the conditions were pretty bad. We ended up doing the recovery with a group of farmers, and they were working in the rain partly. Things were kind of messy, so they ended up piling birds up on the ground next to the area that we were going to be composting, put our windrows in. And, you know, a couple days later, everything's built, all the windrows are built, everything's beautiful, everything's hot. And that one area, I'm standing out there, and all of a sudden I see like 50 vultures and 2 bald eagles come in. Birds. I don't want birds. They were attracted to that bloody spot. They were where the body fluids were on the ground. So we very quickly covered that with a heavy bunch of wood chips. And then we got pyrotechnics, and we killed a couple of vultures. I didn't, but we killed a couple of vultures and hung those. The German way of deterring pests is to hang the animal in the area, and it kind of gives them an example of what will happen, I guess. So, but we were doing fireworks, all kinds of stuff, just to keep those birds off of there, because they could pick up the avian influenza and bring it to the next farm and the next farm. And so that's where we have to be very careful about ever putting anything on the ground.
You talked about that, at starting that bed, you talked about 24 inches.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the standard, or would you?
For large-scale composting, that's really standard.
Okay.
If we're just doing a couple of chickens, we were talking about a couple of chickens, it's really hard to just do a couple of chickens because you don't have the mass balance that you need in that. So then I would have to add manure with that. So I would have to add other nitrogen with that carbon so that I could make it actually happen. And that's a mass issue. That's a size issue. Because if I have one chicken that's pretty short, it probably won't heat up very quickly. And then the dog or somebody else is gonna go in there and pull that out because it hasn't heated up. So we always want to make sure that we're doing that right. But most of the time we're using 24 inches. The poultry industry started with 12, and I was like, that's not enough. Just not, and it's litter. So it's like shavings and poop and other stuff, so it's not even very chunky. And what we talk about chunky wood chips, we want big stuff. It doesn't make your best end product, but our goal here is to dispose of these animals and sanitize these animals, not to make a good compost product. They will make a good compost product. And all of the avian influenza windrows go right back out and grow corn and other feed for those chickens. So all of it works really well. It's our whole nutrient cycling. So we do use all of that manure after it's sanitized, and that's why we compost, is to sanitize. Yes?
Kentucky has a lot of karst systems,
Yep, we do too.
so before setting up any windrows or composting, it's a good idea to check to see if there's underground waterways, or karst, or sinkholes
Right.
around or such.
Yeah, and I don't know how your property sets up that way, whether you guys have a lot of karst topography, but we do, and I'll tell you just a quick story. Up in the Adirondacks, there's a lot of karst topography. We have quite a lot of caves in New York also. Not like Mammoth Cave, I wish. It's such a beautiful cave. But we had a large ice cream producer up on the border up there, and they were dumping milk. They were land spreading all the milk waste. And they did it for years, and what they did was the farmers sent their milk, and the factory said, but you have to take the waste the waste liquids back and land apply them. So for years, they were land applying all this milk waste, which it's high BOD, it's high nutrient, it's all that kind of stuff. Well, they fouled a whole bunch of farm wells forever. They have to bring in water at this point. They cannot use any of their water anymore. So, and that was because of karst topography. It's those preferential pathways that allow things to just go crazy. It's like tiling. I don't know. Do you guys tile down here? Do you have tile drains? Yeah. When you put a tile drain in, that's exactly what happens. And I can't believe we still do it. We do still do it in New York too, but very, very minimally at this point, because we realize it is creating that preferential pathway. I have the Cuga compost that I showed you yesterday has a couple of tile drains going across the field, and there are ponds, a whole series of ponds on the other side of that field. And so I ended up testing all of those ponds just to make sure that nothing was getting all the way across. And none of the effluent was getting all the way across. So this over here is, we do have some vessels that people try to use, and the first ones were old cement mixers. And they work to an extent, but I sort of shared that yesterday. I'm not as excited about tumblers as other methods. I'd really rather see them in windrows and stuff. I think it just is more effective. But we do have an operation in Pennsylvania where they do use a large tumbler, and it seems to work really well. But they've figured out how to manage it also. They're very good at what they're doing, how they're managing it. A lot of these aren't turnkey. So you really have to know, the person really has to understand how to make them work for you. This
Gene,
is
with windrows, does it also give you an opportunity to add to it, maybe like your chicken manure, just to go?
Oh, yes.
You'll test it and it says, then you can come back and then add something to it. Is that another benefit for that as well?
Yeah. Yeah, you can keep adding to windrows. You have to keep adding to tumblers, but you really want that full batch. You have to have it a certain fullness, or else it won't work. Selecting sites. We just did this exercise on Keith's and Kathy's farm. We want to be away from water, so we're looking for where water can go overland if there's a heavy rain. We're looking for ponds, we're looking for streams, we're looking for guts or ravines, and we're looking for our animals' wells, and our wells. We got to make sure that we're not in close proximity to any of those things. So, always keep that in mind. High and dry isn't necessarily the best way to do it, but finding a good, well-drained site that you can work on, that's flat enough to work on, and that you can actually do things, or using the strategy of moving it around so you're not concentrating nutrients under that and then tilling the land that was under it, putting it in corn, putting it in alfalfa, timothy, whatever we're putting it in. And that, that footprint underneath that windrow that you have is going to be very fertile. So that's why putting it in that field, even, or wherever you want to repair in your area, those grounds are going to be very fertile underneath that windrow.
Could we pop back to that picture of the property, and I can show you where the pine is? And could you do that real quick? Can you pull that up?
No, I saw the pond, so if we can visualize it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just stay where we're at.
Yeah, stay where we're at. Yeah.
No, that's okay.
So what about the pond?
I just want to show, in reference to what you're talking about, the water flow and also the pond, where we're talking about putting the windrows.
Right. So I think we've got that under. I understand that, but the point that I'm making is moving them around the fields will allow the soil to be built even faster and better. Instead of having one site all the time for all of it and having to move it places, we actually build our windrow up on the hill, or wherever we're gonna, whatever fields we want that compost to be in, move it in there.
If you're not sure what's close to your location, there are several GIS layers maps
Yes,
show sinkholes, underground water, show car systems,
right,
springs, and shows wells.
yes.
And help you identify things that you may not know might be in the
Yes.
water basin.
There are soil and water maps and NRCS maps and layered maps where you can see all this kind of stuff. I also like to use my eyes and think about what plants are growing there. Are there cattails there? Are there rushes and sedges? Are they wet sometimes? Is there a tree line there? Because if you have trees in there, you know there's water there, because those trees wouldn't be living if there wasn't some water, you know, and a lot of cases not too much water, but with the sycamores, it could be a lot of water, you know, so we can look at different ways.
You want to take a break or just keep going?
Up to you guys. What do you think? I don't know where we are with time.
Well, look, we're about 10 after and
10 after
about 10.
10.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? Up to you.
5 minutes.
You want to keep going, or you want to? People should feel free to come in and out as they wish.
Just take 5
Yep.